Today, the 2nd of December, 2020, and we're still talking about business ethics. We're just in the middle of the parashas about Yaakov Avinu. So let's speak about Yaakov Avinu, truth and honesty in Yaakov Avinu. There are a few things to put together. The Apostle says, and we quote it every day, Titen emes liYaakov, chesed l'Avram, asher nishba'ta lav within mekedem. We highlight the emes of Yaakov. Yaakov is specifically declared to have a special midah of emes, of, I guess, extreme honesty and truthfulness, and we should do our best to hold him as a role model and to learn from him. So it's obviously a value then to study what we know about him a bit more and see various chidushim and various discussion points that emerge. Where is the main place? Point number one here is, where is the main place that from which we learn Yaakov Avinu's major midah of honesty and emes? Now, from the Rambam, at least at first glance, I'll try and tell you something later on which tries to turn this on its head, but the Rambam, first glance, and somewhere in Hilchos Schirus, Gav the Rambam expert. You got a Rambam there? Do you remember this Rambam? You'll have to unmute
At the end. At the end, the last one. The last halacha, Peg is Gimel, I think.
Oh, Hilchos Schirus. Do you have it? Do you have it with you now?
No, I can get it online.
If you manage to conjure it up on screen as we speak, you can possibly read it out. I don't have it at arm's length. Oh yeah, that's a good idea. The Rambam says that a worker has to be very honest, and he quotes as an example of this, as a paradigm of this, Yaakov Avinu in his work for Lavan. It's really a self-declaration that Yaakov Avinu made, but that's okay because the government's been relying on a lot of self-declarations for COVID grants and so on. But the Yaakov Avinu said about himself, here it is, that's excellent, that was very quick. So let's read that out. Can you see it if you can get up the chat on screen, you can see it. The Rambam says, I'm a fifth wheel now. There's no need for me to translate. You've done it for me. A worker is, says the Rambam, to work with all his strength. Shahar Yaakov at Tzaddik Omar ki b'chol koichi avadati es avichem. Yaakov the Tzaddik said to Rachel and Leah, with all my strength I served your father, I worked for your father. V'fichach notal schar zois af ba'olam hazeh, and he was rewarded for it even in olam hazeh. So a worker has to work with full honesty and full commitment. When he ran away with his family, when he said, look, this is time to leave, the end of Vayetze, and he basically fled, and the story is that Lavan chased after him and confronted him and said he shouldn't have run away, and then Yaakov himself confronted him back and said, why are you confronting me like this? And he made reference to the work you've done. He said, I'm extremely honest. In my work with you, I worked with me in the heat of the sun and in the cold of the winter. And if things went missing, then I made up the loss, and I pushed sleep away from my eyes. He really spoke at length about his honesty. And from the Rambam, it seemed this is supposed to be the paradigm that we hold up and we bear in mind as we work. And although things have changed nowadays, I think we spoke about this some time ago, there are even halachos in Shulchan Aruch about a worker's got to be so committed to his work. There's no time to bench properly. You have to miss out a bracha in benching. And what was the other thing? You daven a shorter form of Shmoneh Esrei. You don't come down from the tree. You daven at the top of the tree. If every minute of work counts. And even though later poskim say that people aren't as particular about the seconds or minutes that the workers spend on their work as they used to be, and therefore those particular halachas have lapsed, the core value that one has to be extremely honest with one's work, of course, still remains. Now, of course, we are challenged when we consider the various stories of Yaakov Avinu, and we want to relate to his greatness, and particularly his being the model of the Midas Emes. We're obviously challenged by the stories we find of him where he does not appear to have lived up to that himself. And obviously, I'm referring to the stories in Parshas Toldos, where, as Esau himself bitterly complains later on, he seems to have defrauded Esau, first out of the Bechorah, that was his, and secondly, after the brachas that Yitzchak planned to give to him. And one thing I saw this year, I noticed a few things this year that I hadn't noticed before. The first story, let's home in on the first story for a moment. Esau comes home and is extremely hungry and irritable, and he says, he says, please, can you give me some, well, yeah, he says please, but I don't know if his manner was a please manner. But he asked for this red thing, and Yaakov Avinu immediately negotiated. He said, aha, for that you have to sell me your Bechorah. And one can't help but have the immediate reaction that maybe was it not a bit inappropriate to take advantage of someone's exhaustion at the end of what might have been a very difficult day and say, well, I'm only going to give you a little bit of soup if you sell your Bechorah to me. I wonder if this is something that has bothered you in the past. I imagine that it has. Something you've thought about. Gav, have you seen specific discussions about this?
Yeah. I mean, I did only the Rishonim. And the MSV, I can't remember.
We spoke about this not long ago, didn't we? Yeah, I don't remember what we said.
I mean, I remember the Rashbam says he bought it for money. It was a financial transaction, and lentil soup was only a meal that they had afterwards. Is that
the Rashbam?
Yeah.
Right. Well, I saw that this year, and I hadn't noticed that before. So the Ramban brings, he says, somebody says, I don't think the Ramban endorses it himself, but the Ramban says that although the story doesn't mention it, as you say, Gav, there was money involved as well. So according to that, the story isn't as it seems at first glance. And Bechlal, what this reminds us of is that we have to learn the stories carefully and in great detail, and realize there might be details that aren't immediately obvious to the eye. Which
he's a Das Rafik.
Perspective. Pardon?
That's an exceptional reading of the Psukim, isn't it, the Rashbam?
Well, he says, I mean, it does seem from when you take a step back and you think about what.
Yeah, there could be a space.
Yeah, there could be space to learn that. He says, Esau said, please give me the red soup. And Yaakov says, look, he stops, he doesn't immediately feed him. He says, please sell me your Bechorah. Now, it does appear that he wasn't going to give him the soup and carry on the conversation. That we do see was putting a bit of pressure on him. But there's not necessarily an indication that he was going to stop him taking the soup. Or even that had Esau said, no, I'm sorry, but I want the Bechorah for myself, and insisted. Not even clear that Yaakov would have said, sorry, no soup, or poured the soup down the sink or anything like that. He just was negotiating for a moment. And when he said, Michroch hayom, sell it to me, it could well mean, sell it, let's arrange a price, let's sell it properly. It doesn't have to mean that sell it to me and this is the payment. There are a few other points here. I don't remember who says this. I think I saw it somewhere. But if you see the context, one of the Mepharshim, I think, says that, well, this is really essentially Rashi, but maybe building it up a little bit. Rashi said that Yaakov Avinu had lentils now because this was the Seudas Havrah this is related to the Avelus of Avram Avinu, who had just passed away. This Seudah was a commemorative meal, something relating to the Avelus of Avram Avinu, and it's somewhat meaningful, deeply meaningful. And Esau comes in and immediately is wholly dismissive of the whole meaning of the Seudah, and perhaps by extension of the legacy of Avram Avinu. He's really declaring himself to be completely unfit to be the Bechor. Now, it probably is in the background that Yaakov said, I can't allow the status quo to be that he's the Bechor. It's just a mockery of the whole institution, of the whole future, that whatever is carried in that. It's quite hard for us to assess exactly what the Bechor meant, because we know so little about their day-to-day life.
That parallels the later episode with the bracha, but in that case it was, whereas here it would appear that perhaps Yaakov worked out that he wasn't fit to have the bechorah. In the later episode, it was Rivka who had to convince Yaakov to go ahead with it, because she was the one that could see that the blessing wasn't appropriate for Esau.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, and I was going to mention that later on. It seems he's much more reluctant later on.
Yes.
It certainly hasn't gathered more and more confidence over time.
No, Rivka
is
the one that is always said to have had the prophecy, if you like, to know that it wasn't appropriate for Esau.
Maybe, and this is just conjecture, but maybe the way to explain that is that Yaakov Avinu did it once, and then had a sense of, I never want to do that again, because he felt so bad at having done it once. It went against his grain. The Abarbanel mentions two other points. He says, if we're questioning this story, we may be assuming that the Yaakov Avinu is faced with a situation: do I buy the bechorah, or do I not buy the bechorah? In which case, Esau will keep it. The Barbanel said it's possible the Yaakov realized there's no way that Esau is going to be allowed to keep it, and if I don't step forward and sort of present myself as a candidate or take hold of the situation, it's going to be sold somehow outside the family altogether. So he saw there might be dire consequences in him just sitting back and letting things proceed as they were. That's the first approach of the Abarbanel. And the second approach of the Abarbanel is that Yaakov Avinu was essentially saying, he gives a bit more of an introduction. He says that the role of the bechorah was to be somewhat of a minister in the house, to be in a household. And therefore, Yaakov Avinu was feeding the lechem and zid adoshim to Esau when he came in, was somewhat of a natural thing to be doing if he was a bechor. So he's saying he sold it to Esau and he said, okay, you give me the bechorah. But it's not so much, you give me the bechorah and I'll give you this one meal of soup. You give me the bechorah and I, as the bechor, will take responsibility for always providing for the household, not just as a one-off. So again, with some attention to detail, we get different perspectives in the story. And Joe, you've really added to that by saying, we look at the story of the bechorah, followed by the story of brachas, and compare Yaakov Avinu's attitude, we may be able to see an echo. Like I say, it is to some extent conjecture, but we may be able to see an echo of his soul searching and his reluctance to have to be involved yet a second time in it.
Although I think in the second time, having said what I said, I think there was an element of yira on Yaakov's part. Like, what if I'm found out? He didn't want to be found out.
Yeah, when Rivka told him, so there are a couple of elements of the story which I was coming to. That Rivka told him, no, you should do it. And he voiced concerns. He said, maybe my father will feel me. I'll be a trickster in his eyes. I lose my credibility in the eyes of my father. He was very worried, not only that he wouldn't get the bracha, but that he would incur the anger of Yitzchak Avinu, and that would somehow jeopardize his relationship with his father, or his father did investing in his future. He saw that there might be quite harsh consequences. So his mother said to him, Olai kilelascha b'ni. Which literally means your curse will be upon me, my son, Rivka said. But that just leads us to try and to think, what does this mean? I mean, she's encouraging to do something which he fears may be very wrong and very harmful. And she says, well, if you get a kala, it's on me. Yaakov says, I can imagine Yaakov saying to myself, is it? How can you take the kala? And maybe he would have said more. Does it help me if you take the kala? Do I want you to suffer instead of me? I don't want anyone to suffer. I don't want to do this if it's a wrong thing to do. This will cause a klala from Yitzchak, or a punishment from Hashem, or it's the wrong thing to do.
I think I understood it as Rivka sort of effectively saying that, and maybe not in these words, but underlying the words, saying that she would intercede in that case and saying, no, I put Yaakov up to it. I must take the blame. Don't.
You mean it would be her responsibility?
Yeah.
She would therefore prevent the klala.
Yes.
She was confident that she could do so.
Yeah. Don't punish Yaakov. It was all me. He was just obeying his mother, sort of thing. And then there's a kibbutz aim aspect, maybe.
That is interesting. The Targum Onkelos says, "Alim isamra isamrin benavua," etc. I think it says, "To me it was said in prophecy that you will not get a klala." I heard the Rabbi Miller used to quote the Targum Onkelos in this context. Very, very interesting. It's quite a chiddush to associate what this Targum Onkelos says with those very words, because Olai kilelascha b'ni doesn't seem to be saying, I had a prophecy telling me that you wouldn't get a klala, but it could be. Olai kilelascha b'ni could mean the issue of your klala is upon me. Now, but I'm taking responsibility for the issue. In what way am I taking responsibility for the issue? By telling you that I had the prophecy that it won't happen. What occurred to me this year is that it may be, the Targum may be tying together just the strands of the story that we all know about. Because when Rivka was expecting, and she had the experience of a very strange pregnancy, particularly as some highlight, I think the Ran highlights this, that she felt that she saw this contradiction of a baby drawn towards the Kedusha of the Shul, or drawn towards Avodah Zarah. She felt there was some sort of conflict playing itself out inside her, and she took advice, and she went, for whatever reason, apparently not to Esav, or not to Yitzchak, but Telech lidroishes Hashem. She went out to search out Hashem. Rashi says from the Yeshiva Shem Le'eva, so there were people who had enough prophetic insight to be able to help her, vision or insight, and they told her, Shnei goyim b'vitnech, Shnei lo'omim mimei ayich yiparedu. There are two nations in your womb, and they will separate from there. And this is going to be a struggle. But the nature of the struggle is going to be when one rises, the other falls, and when one falls, the other rises. So they can't both be in the ascendancy. So I'm wondering if one can say this is what's going on in the story of the brachas. That's exactly what Yitzchak wants to do. Yitzchak wants to put them both on an equal pedestal. He wants to raise Esav, maybe not to demote Yaakov, but to raise Esav. And hopefully everything will be fine and dandy and they'll work together. But Rivka is saying, I know from Nevuah that it can't be. If Yitzchak, if your father gives the bracha to Esav and promotes him as far as he wants to promote him, that will have to cause him to that will have to call Yaakov to be to be demoted, and therefore it's important that you should intercede here now, should interfere with the process and make sure that the bracha comes to you and not to him. So the onkelos is saying she had a specific nevuah, and if you're right, Joe, that as you said before, they had this reluctance. We understand, I suppose, that this is what pushed him over the edge. And you also mentioned that he said, what were we saying? He expressed particular fear. He said, "Ola Yomusheni Beni."
Sorry, I can't remember the exact lotion at the moment.
Right, that's what you're referring to.
Yeah, that's
right.
Yes,
Ola Yomusheni Ovi. Maybe my father will feel me.
In other words, he would be found out.
Yeah. So there's a famous point. I'm not sure the first person to point this out was, but I think it's based on the insight of the Vilna Gaon. There are a lot of words in Hebrew which appear to be synonyms, but really there are different shades of meaning. And the Vilna Gaon says, what is the difference between two words which superficially just mean maybe in Hebrew? One is olai, and one is pen, like we say in Shema. It sounds familiar to you, Joe, yeah?
I read the Dvar Torah on it last week about that point. It's quite
interesting. On Pashas Toldos.
Yes.
Right, so this exact point you probably read.
Yeah.
We say in Shema, be careful lest your heart is drawn away.
Yeah.
And the Vilna Gaon says you have this other word ulai, and he says there's a distinction between the two words. You use ulai when it's something that, in both cases, both words, ulai and pen, are referring to things may have and may not happen. However, you use the word ulai when basically you want the thing to happen. And you use the word pen, indeed, and this is like the English usage, lest, you use the word pen when you're mentioning the possibility of something you want to not happen. And if that's the case, then on the surface, it seems to be incongruous, seems not to fit, that Yaakov Avinu would have said, Ulai Musheni Avi. He should rather have said, Pen Musheni Avi. I'm worried lest this happens. So the answer that's said, as you probably read, is that this is exactly the point that we're discussing. That Yaakov was very reluctant to be doing what he was doing, and was almost wishing he'd be found out, because when you have to do something difficult, so you take a view, you have to be a man and you do what you need to do. But there's nothing wrong in wishing that you wouldn't have to do it. And if he was discovered, even after his best efforts and after the disguise given to him by Rivka and so on, if he was discovered, then he'd have no choice but to not take the brachas, and he was perfectly happy with that. Like I say, he was almost hoping that it wouldn't happen.
The answer apparently is given by the Maharatz Chayos on Makos 24a. Rav.
Oh, interesting.
Well, hang on, it's cited by people. It says a beautiful answer given by the Maharatz Chayos, Makos 24a, Rav Moshe Sternbuch and Rav Shimon Moshe Diskin, is effectively what you've just been saying, is that Yaakov's dedication to truth was so strong that he actually hoped that Yitzhak would feel him and catch him in this trickery that was so anathema to his very essence, even if it would mean losing his father's blessing for him and all of his offspring.
Right. Which is very, very interesting.
Yeah.
Even after all that, though, there are a couple of additional points to be made, and maybe one more to make at the very end. A little surprise at the very end. The additional points to make here is that we have a concept of people being tested, of nisyonos, of, perhaps mainly as the Ramban says, rather than have a slightly different concept. The Ramban at the end of Vayera says, what is the concept of a nisayon? The Torah said, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem nisayos Avraham. What's the idea of a test? What's the point of a test? I mean, a test we normally think of as a way in which the tester determines the quality or ability of the testee, if you like. There's no need for Hashem to test anyone in that with that understanding. So, so the Ramban says the test brings out the best quality of the person. It's not so much to test for Hashem to find out; it's more to allow you to bring your potential min hakoach el hapayil. Till now, Avram Avinu had, in the immediate context in which the Ramban says it, Avram Avinu had this tremendous potential to serve Hashem with a total commitment and a total dedication. And but it hadn't been put to the test in the sense that it hadn't been brought out into actuality. It remained a potential that lay within his being. It remained a measure of the level of commitment that he had within himself, but it hadn't been made actual and real. And doing it in real life is what does that. By the same token, various forum extend this and say that that the others were basically, and maybe everyone, is basically tested according to one's midah, according to the main thing one is supposed to be achieving in this world. So, if Avram is a man of chesed, he's challenged to test his midas chesed to the utmost. Now, how do you make someone test his midas chesed to the utmost? Well, one way in which you do that is you give him a situation where he has to show extreme chesed. Okay, fair enough. That's what Yaakov Avinu did with the malachim. But another way is you give him a situation where he has to not show chesed. He has to be cruel. Maybe he has to be cruel because he has to be cruel to be kind, and he has to be cruel to Yishmael to preserve the future of Yitzchak. Maybe he has to be, as it were, cruel to Yitzchak with the Akedah in order to show that the midah remains in his control. He's not doing it because it's just fun and pleasant to be nice to people. He's doing it because a real sense of truth. That will be put to the test by having to do the opposite. Or the final thing is, if you have a certain midah, let's say you're a man of chesed, and then a situation comes about where you have to act with chesed, with non-chesed. You then say, oh, I was finding it such a strain to be nice to people. I'm so glad to be able to take a day off doing that. Well, if you do that, then you never really had the true midah of chesed, because why would you want to break? Why would you want to do something different for a day? That's really your midah. So being faced with the opportunity with a situation that demands a different midah is part of the testing of the midah. And this may be the understanding of Yaakov Avinu as being tested in the midas ha'emes, in terms of a situation being put in front of him where he has to be somewhat untruthful or apparently lack integrity. He has to take the brachas away, the bechorah away from Esav, and then the brachas away from him. So, despite the fact that you have to act perhaps with sheker now, how important is it to you? That's the test. And there's more than that. He said when Yaakov came to Yitzchak, said the famous words, "Anochi Esav b'chorecha." And the famous part about that is that he was meaning to say, well, I am the one who's bringing you, here I am, full stop, Esav is your b'chor. So it's not an outright lie to Yitzchak. And maybe just that point. It's not an outright lie to Yitzchak. But I remember Rabbi Miller used to, probably quoting of Dessler, used to question this. He used to say, what exactly is the point of this? And think of it this way. Is he trying? Does he want Yitzchak to understand? Does he not want Yitzchak to understand? If he wants Yitzchak to understand, then the game's up. So what's the point of doing this? And if he doesn't, then you're still deceiving him. How does it help to say Anochi Esav B'cherecha? And he said the point was that Yaakov, in doing this, was he was grabbing on to the little bit of emes that lies in the in the sheker. So he had to deceive Yitzchak, but he was keeping alive within him the desire. I really don't want to be lying. I want to be telling the truth. So when he has to lie, he does it in a way which minimizes the falsehood. Of course, Yitzchak doesn't understand it because Yaakov has no choice. But at least the words he's saying, Anochi Esav B'cherecha, at least the words he's saying are words which could be deemed as being true, and it's not such an outright lie. So it's no coincidence that Yaakov Avinu was tested in these things which tested his particular manner. We can see here, though, that Yaakov was very anxious to do the right thing in those cases. But what's interesting is there are still forums that suggest there's an element of criticism, there's an element of wrongdoing. So, for example, the Sfas Emes says that at the beginning of Vayetze, there's a Medrash Tanchuma, which is rather cryptic. Sometimes the Tanchuma is quite mysterious. It seems to quote things at length that have virtually nothing to do with the Seder at hand. So the Medrash at the beginning of Vayetze says that what's the din of a Ritzach B'Shgaga? To just randomly talk about Ritzach B'Shgaga. So we know the din. The person who killed accidentally, manslaughter, is chayav to go to galus. Not of course to be killed. So the Sfas Emes and others say, why is the Medrash on Parshas Toldos and Parshas Vayetze beginning with a discussion of Ritzach B'Shgaga, as if to imply that Yaakov Avinu has killed someone by mistake and therefore is going into exile? What's Yaakov Avinu's story got to do with the Ritzach B'Shgaga? So the Sfas Emes answers that in causing the rejection and the ousting of Yaakov Avinu, it's titled. The Medrash is comparing Yaakov to Ritzach B'Shgaga because it's saying that at the end of the day, what Yaakov did jeopardized to a certain extent the possibility of Esav's future. And of course, as we've discussed, we must consider that Yaakov must have done it with great thought and done his best to come to the right decision. But still, according to the view of the Sfas Emes, Yaakov Avinu had such a strength of character and such a genuineness to him that he could have brought Esav back, and therefore it was wrong for him, even with all those cheshbonos, to come to the decision that it's right to take I was talking about just the initial chayra, whether that followed on to the brachas, maybe he suggested something different to his mother. I don't know, but I am saying that this idea that maybe Yaakov Avinu was somewhat to blame for doing these things, which in the end caused the great disillusionment of Esav. Now that doesn't mean we should look again at the story of Michal Chayim and say, Esav comes in and Yaakov is callous and so that. No, you give me an enormous amount before I give you before I give you, you give me £1 million before I give you a get. No other cheshbon to that. Just using using a situation for exorbitant negotiation? Well, according to what we've discussed, that may well not have been the case. And one certainly should be careful in general not to interpret stories in Chumash like that about people who are clearly teachers are to view them as the people of greatness. We definitely have to look at those stories through that prism. But after we've done that, we still see sometimes in foreign there's still a suggestion that on a deeper level, it still wasn't the right thing to do, and we that is part to recognize that, to consider that possibility, and to grapple with that, if you like. It remains part of what we do when we want to learn Chumash really seriously. In Parashat Vayetze, again, we discussed the beginning of Parashat Vayetze. There's more in Parashat Vayetze, which tells us about a completely different angle, yet another angle on the Midas Emes. Quite an intriguing one. I'll have to be quick. I have to keep to my curfew. When Yaakov Avinu first meets Rachel, the pasuk says that Yaakov said, "Ki achi," he told her, "Ki achi Aviyahu, I am the brother of your father." Says Rashi, what does that mean? At least on a deeper level. It says, "Achiv ani beramos." It says that there was a mini discussion between them. I want to marry you. No, my father won't let you. He'll trick you. Yaakov Avinu said, whatever trickery he throws at me, Achiv ani beramos. I'm his brother. I can match him. It gets us thinking. That's interesting. Is a man with the paragon of truth supposed to do that? It gets us to think. Well, yes. The fact that you're a man of truth doesn't mean that you have to be taken advantage of. You have to be able to defend yourself to a certain extent, and particularly as, of course, life doesn't exist in a vacuum. Person, for example, maybe in a standard situation of being a breadwinner for his family, it's all very well turning the other cheek and being nice to those who are running away with all one's money, but that's unfair on the people who are dependent on oneself. Of course, life is the balance of these responsibilities. And we understand that even a man of super greatness in the middle of Emes would say, Achiv ani beramos. The problem is, I found when I first noticed this, I found this a major problem. And Yaakov Avinu wakes up after having been given the wrong wife. And he confronts Lavan and says, why did you give me the wrong wife? And he said, well, I had to give you the older one, but don't worry, I've got a deal for you. Just work another 7 years, and then you can have Rachel as well. So what would you expect that Yaakov would do? Especially if Yaakov said, I'm Achiv ani beramos, I can match Lavan's ramos. I would have expected him to say, there's no way. I'm sorry, Lavan. I worked for 7 days. The understanding was Rachel. So you give me Rachel. Maybe I'll stay married to Leah as well, but I have to get Rachel without having to work another 7 years. Why did he agree to work another 7 years and be taken for a ride like that? How did that fit with Achiv ani beramos? And you could ask the question actually in a bit of a deeper way. The Torah wants to bring out, they said Achiv ani beramos. I imagine it's because it wants to inspire us and teach us that the man of truth can also be Achiv beramos. That's an important part of it. But if it ends up as if the whole thing falls on its face, if it ends up as a failure, then I'm surprised that the Torah wanted to highlight it to us in the first place, because it seems to make almost a joke of Yaakov Avinu's bravado in saying Achiv ani beramos. I thought that was a very powerful question. But it occurred to me, I think there's a beautiful answer here. What was Yaakov Avinu's attitude to the situation in the end? He'd been given the wrong wife. And he noticed in the morning, so it seems to me that at that moment when he woke up and found it was Leah, he had a choice. How's he going to deal with this? He could say, look, you're not supposed to be here, get out. But that's the question on the story. Why didn't he divorce her? He could have done that. The second choice he had was to say, well, I should have chap last night, I didn't chap. But Lamaisa, it's quite a late stage now because he has been together with her, especially according to Chazal, that she became Muberes that night. It's not a simple matter to just turn the clock back and start again. So I imagine that Yaakov Avinu at that moment said to himself, look, this is what was supposed to be. Leah's also supposed to be a wife to me. I'm going to accept that. And this is the chap, if he accepts that, since the custom of the time was for the prospective son-in-law to pay money to the father-in-law, and Yaakov Avinu was doing it in the form of working for him for 7 years, when Lavan says work another 7 years, Yaakov says, well, fair play. Now, given the situation, given where we are now, and you've got to, it's accepting reality as it is now, I am married to Leah, and I want to remain married to Leah. I accept that the first 7 years now becomes redesignated, as it were, as being years for Leah, and I agree to work another 7 years for Rachel. So rather than it being a terrible example of someone taken advantage, helplessly taken advantage of, it's a story of someone, yes, he was lied to, he was taken advantage of, but immediately he saw it in the correct light, and immediately he rose to the challenge of maintaining his integrity despite the betrayal that he had had. I think understood in that way, it's a remarkable remarkable thing to think about. But there's another story in Vayetze, and there it seems that Yaakov Avinu does show Achiv Ani Baramos, because in the story of the sticks, when finally after the 7 years, in the last 6 years, Lavan sets up various conditions. He says, well, you get the spotted sheep, I'll get the speckled sheep, whatever it is. It's quite a complex set of psukim there. There seems to be a machloika, and then Yaakov Avinu sets up some sort of supernatural or semi-supernatural way of arranging that the right color are born. Now, Rashi seems to understand that it was supernatural, but the Ramban, at least according to one pshat from memory, he seems to learn that this was, he did manipulate it. But again, the Ramban says, well, what's wrong with that? I mean, the deal was you'll get the spotted ones. If you know how to make them come out spotted, then that's fine. Now, Yaakov Avinu may have found it unethical to do that if he felt that Yaakov Avinu, that Lavan was being honest with him. But if Lavan was trying to maneuver in every possible way he could, that Yaakov Avinu would get as little as possible, Yaakov could counter that by doing the thing with the sticks. And there Taka showed himself to be Achiv Ani Baramos. The Torah is even giving us an example of that. And finally, and we were going to make an effort to finish on time, the extra thing, I think the icing on the cake, a little treat. The treat, in I think it's a fascinating idea. You can judge whether you think it's right, because it's quite a chiddush. But Rabbi Miller said many years ago, he quoted a shir from Yitzchak Isaac Sher. One of the, I can't remember Nevada, of course, Slobodka, Bali Musa. He's got a piece all about Yaakov Avinu, and he asks the question that we've been addressing, basically. And he says, where is it that you see Yaakov's paradigm of the Midas Emes? Now, we said you probably see it in like the Rambam identified, extreme honesty. But Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac Sher said you can't be there, because the Titan Emes Liyaakov, the special mid of Yaakov's Emes, must be something which is well beyond what one is required to do in halacha. It has to be a level wholly above that. That's already a chiddush, but that's his chiddush. So where do you see the middle Emes? And he says an incredible chiddush. Like I said, it's a very novel idea, but food for thought. He says, we think, and it's based on a Rashi, but I'll say this very quickly because I said it wouldn't go over time. We tend to think that if Yaakov Avinu hadn't stolen the brachas, then Esau would have got the brachas. So that's not true. That's actually a Rashi, by the way, in Vayishlach. So look out for that. I think it's that when the Malach acknowledges the brachas, or when Esau acknowledges the brachas, Yehilacha Shalach, perhaps he says that when they finally meet, Esau said, you keep what's yours. And Rashi says, Shaloi Soma, you shouldn't say that had Yaakov not done the subterfuge, he wouldn't have received the brachas. He would still have received the brachas. So if that's the case, you read that Rashi and you think, well, my goodness, I've got to relearn the whole of Parshas Toldot. The whole story now is in a different light. We've got the brachas anyway. What was the point of the whole charade? The Yitzchak Isaac Shep asks this question, and he says, you're right, he would have got the brachas anyway. So why did he do that? To understand why he did that, look in Parshas Vayechi. In Parshas Vayechi, you have a story of Yaakov Avinu is about to give brachas to Menashe and Ephraim, and he experiences a leaving, a pulling away of the Ruach HaKodesh that he had with which he was going to give a bracha. And he realizes that's because of various descendants that Menashe and Ephraim were going to have in the future. Right? So there's Nistalka Ruach HaKodesh. So Yitzchak Isaac adds a chiddush to that. He says, that must be quite unpleasant for a person who's a Novi Ruach HaKodesh to feel the vacuum of the Ruach HaKodesh pulling away from him. But imagine Yitzchak would get ready his whole Nevuah trance, the Ruach HaKodesh that he required for the bracha he was going to give to Esav, thinking that Esav is somewhat of a tzaddik, and then Esav comes in and he's all ready, and all of a sudden, it's like he's feeling Gehinnom opening up underneath him because he can't give the bracha because the terrible revelation that it is not going to get the nevuah that he needs. Hashem is no way going to support this bracha. That would have been a tremendously painful experience. The Yitzchak Isaac Shea says that Yaakov Avinu's emes was to, through the subterfuge, through behind the scenes, rearranging things behind the scenes, preventing Yitzchak from having that extremely painful anti-emes experience. That's it. That's the big chiddush to finish off. But those are the lessons that we learned from Yaakov Avinu about the midas emes. That's a little bit of food for thought on the various things that we had in the last two sedges in Toldot and Vayetze.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. All right.
Well done.
Okay.
See you next time at the in Vayechi. So it goes on to say to justify the possible ulai without it being for the reason we said before, but in a different way. It said as well. It said, I'll just read it. It says in Genuzus Hagra, it is related that the Vilna Gaon himself answered this question based on a comment of the Sforno in Parshas Vayechi. The Torah relates that Yaakov hugged Ephraim and Menashe before blessing them. The Sforno explains that in order for a blessing to take effect, the person giving it must somehow connect himself to the one he is blessing.
Mm-hmm.
Although the most powerful way to connect is through seeing the other person, Yaakov was blind at the end of his life and was unable to do so. He therefore connected himself to his grandchildren through the next best alternative, touch. Based on this explanation, we may now explain that Yaakov used the expression ulai because he wanted his father to feel him in order that the blessing should take effect and be more potent, because the seeing wasn't working.
Oh well, he wanted him to feel him and not realize he was being fooled.
Yes,
that's not the same as an apostle.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sheni of him. I mean, maybe he'll feel me,
and that will validate
the bracha.
That will validate the bracha because it wouldn't have been somehow valid. It wouldn't have taken effect without.
No, but why would he have given the bracha anyway? The simple pshat is he wouldn't have given the bracha if he'd felt him.
Well, remember though that because of remember you still got this Hakol Kol Yaakov Hayadayim Yedei Esav. And he was suitably dressed up by Rivka, wasn't he? So that the feeling was going to work. That was part of the thing. He thought it was Esav because of the touching. So he was giving the bracha anyway. The other thing was.
Sorry. So he would have. How you understand is he would have.
Well, when Rivka put these clothes on Yaakov, mm-hmm. they were like the hunting clothes. They were that hunting jacket or whatever it was that he left, which he hadn't gone out in. And there's a departure about that in itself. Anyway, so that's what's made Yitzchak think that it was Esav, possibly because albeit the voice was of Yaakov, Hakol Kol Yaakov. the Yadayim Yadei Esav was because of the hunting gear that was on him. So I'm saying, but the touch was there, that because Yaakov was blind. Yitzhak was blind. So the hugging of Yaakov hugged Ephraim and Manasseh before blessing them, because he himself at that point, Yaakov himself was blind at that point, and that's why he hugged Ephraim and Manasseh for his blessing to them to take effect. So similarly, what it's saying is that Yitzhak was blind, and that the blessing wouldn't have taken effect without Yitzhak feeling Yaakov. So for the blessing to take effect, that's why he said Ulai then, Ulai Musheni. He wanted his father to feel to make sure the blessing did take effect.
But again, that assumes that if he would have felt him, he would still have given the bracha. But the simple pshat in the psukim is that Yaakov was saying, maybe my father will feel me, and therefore say he's not giving me the bracha.
That's what I'm trying to say. There's different ways of that, but that's the whole thing of the ulai, because as you said, right, he said the pen is normally not for something not to happen.
You mean there was a thought that although what he articulated was maybe Yitzhak will feel me and deny me the bracha, a little thought that at the same time within his mind was maybe he'll feel me and yet not really realize who I am, but still give me the bracha.
And yes, and without the feeling, the bracha might not have been potent anyway, because Yitzhak couldn't see properly.
Right.
And then
he needed to be dressed in the sufficiently hairy clothes so that Yitzhak would feel him and still think he did something, so still give the bracha, but having felt him made the extra connection.
I see.
Very interesting.
Quite nice. I get this. It's a nice thing. It's just a 3-page thing. It's which is called Parsha Potpuri.
Oh, Parsha Potpuri. That's excellent. Yeah,
you know that one, right? Well, it was in that. So that one comes to mind.